Welcome to a brief history of conspiracy.
This week, Bob Lazar.
Right. So, after decades of Bob Lazar being ridiculed, called a liar, is he vindicated? That's what we're talking about this week. And if you are new to our channel, please like, subscribe, hit that little bell notification so it tells you about new episodes coming up. It really does help us out. So what do you think then? After 30 years of him being called, have you listened to some of the stuff Stanton Friedman has said about Bob?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just him saying I don't agree. It was a personal and aggressive attack for like 30 years.
Yeah.
I always liked Stanton Friedman, and may he rest in peace, but on Bob, he had a blind spot. He could never get past some of the problems with Bob's story.
I think the reason why I'm saying is he vindicated now is obviously because we've got these Tic Tac video and the gimbal video and things that have come out recently, and the government have admitted are true, which must have really confused them. You know, like when they released the statement saying this video is true, there must have been a load of people in the background with weather balloons going, "We don't need the weather balloon." It's like, but I've got debris. So, are we telling the truth? There must have been so many people confused as hell.
Yes. It must have been a shock to the system for so many people that have been, pathological liars to the public for many, many years.
Yeah. There must have been the people that come up with the lies. And it's like, am I out of a job? That's my, the spin guy. Like, what? Truth?
Yeah. I think it must be a bit like that. Yeah.
So strange. But if we look at the things that Bob has been vindicated on over the years, right? There's the hand scanner, the famous hand scanner with the pins thing. Years said didn't exist, even though actually it does kind of appear in the movie that Steven Spielberg, the Close Encounters.
Mm-hmm.
There is a scene where it actually does appear. But anyway, lots of people said this is rubbish. It doesn't exist. And then through Jeremy Corbell, he actually found images of it. He's spoken to engineers that said this thing was horrible. It was a useless machine. It barely ever worked. They used it in, and then it does exist. It's a real thing. And Bob explained it to us 30 years ago. He knew about S4. He called it S4 in 1989 as part of Area 51. He basically made Area 51 famous, but he actually physically said about S4 at Papoose Lake, and later it was found out that was true. That is what that area is called, Section 4 of Area 51.
Yes.
So he knew that.
And by the time of 1989, when he called it that, there was no mention of that area in any official media release prior to him calling it that. So he had knowledge of what the area was called only by the American military.
It appears on no map. Yeah, no maps, nothing. Yeah. He talks about a lot of the areas being underground. Now, we've seen images of Area 51, so a lot of people said, no, you can see the buildings. But we now know a lot of what goes on in Area 51 is underground. We've had people come out and talked about underground structures. Bob talked about that. Got ridiculed for it.
Yeah. Well, if you notice, there's been a massive increase in the building of underground military bases in America and across Europe for many, many years now. Almost like the people in the positions of power know something about our past, like maybe about an asteroid impact, perhaps 12,900 years ago, that they're slowly preparing for the next episode, and they're building all these underground bases in order to save humanity from the next cataclysm.
Yeah. I will put the link to that video that we did talking about that, because that was amazing how some of these underground Hiltons have been built, these amazing hotels underground, and that was the one video that genuinely scared me, that I'm thinking, I'm scared for my children's lives. That's worrying. But I'll put the link to that video because it's fascinating stuff. Something else that Bob knew was Jane's Airways. He knew about that. Mm-hmm. People that lived in Vegas knew that these aircraft were going out to the military base, but they didn't know, one, that it was what it was called. Apparently it is called Jane's Airways. He knew about EG&G, which is a company that it actually runs
recruitment.
It runs recruitment, but actually runs Jane's Airways. And so that's their connection to that as well. But he was headhunted or recruited by EG&G when he went to work for S4. he said he worked at Los Alamos and he was ridiculed for it. But then we know for a fact that he did. We saw the video. George Knapp took him to Los Alamos. He walked around. People were waving at him, saying hi. Nobody even asked him for ID. And he walked around the place like he owned it.
You worked there for a while.
Yeah,
if you can walk around without identification, get in and chat to people that you used to be colleagues with. Yes.
But they've asked him sort of, what did you do at Los Alamos? And he's I can't say, because it was, or at least suggested the work he was doing there was a little bit illegal. But also, I mean, he signed the non-disclosure agreements and the data protection and these things. And if he actually revealed that, he would be arrested. Mm-hmm. But we know for a fact he worked at Los Alamos. That's not under debate. Terry English did the story about how he built the jet car, and they talked about in that story about Bob being a physicist who worked at Los Alamos. Mm-hmm. That wasn't questioned at the time, and when again Corbell has gone back and talked to this reporter, he said, "Yeah, if I'd have got that wrong, they'd have been on me. They'd have forced me to retract it. So I am confident he was a physicist who worked at Los Alamos." Because that's the one thing people have said. Well, maybe he was a bloody janitor at Los Alamos.
Well, possibly, yeah. It would explain how he would know everybody, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah. You don't let a janitor just walk in with a camera crew and walk around.
You don't get many janitors having particle accelerators in their bedrooms when they're teenagers or in their early 20s. I can't remember where it was in his life where he had one, but it was early on in his life. He had a particle accelerator in his bedroom.
Exactly,
I'm sorry. The level of understanding of physics required to build and successfully operate your own particle accelerator in your own home without.
Well, let's talk about his education then, really quickly, right? Because obviously that has been deleted. Officially, all they can find is there's some records of like a community college he went to. He says he has 2 degrees, one from Caltech and one from MIT. One in physics, one in electronics and thermodynamics or something. So there are no records of that. Corbell found people that says they took him to Caltech and dropped him off, and they used to wander off into the library. So if it is a lie, he really prepared that lie 10 years in advance.
Yeah, which seems very unlikely. Or does the American government lying about something again?
Well, it doesn't make any sense as well that his education is just from like a community college. He got the job at Los Alamos. He didn't get that job unless he was just a janitor. He didn't get that job based on no degrees and no education, right? But also we know he's a pretty good engineer. We know obviously from his work now that he loves these things. Yes. He built a jet car. Could you build a jet car? Would you even know where to start?
Yeah, probably. I could probably think about it and go do it if I wanted to. But
I think I know the basics of how a jet car works, but I'm pretty sure it would blow my face off.
Just manufacturing the jet engine in your own garage is pretty difficult to build the jet engine so that it doesn't explode in on itself.
Yeah. I think you're underestimating how hard it would be to build a jet engine. I think it'd be incredibly difficult.
It's incredibly difficult. I'm not saying I don't think it's necessarily beyond me, but it would be incredibly difficult to do. Yes.
Yeah. I can't be bothered to learn the manufacturing process.
Such a young age. Yeah. Claims he's got a high level of education in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics fields. All of his work aligns to that. The fact that he built a jet-powered car, the fact that he had a particle accelerator in his bedroom, he's got quite a good level of understanding of science and mathematics, physics.
He built a hydrogen-powered car. He built one out of his own hands. There's stories about like J.M. Corbell says he built him a flamethrower and it really works. And he says it puts anything Elon Musk built and so to shame. But Bob just built him it. Bob built him a laser. It was a toy, but Bob fiddled with it and turned it into a really powerful laser that Jeremy could start fires with. And then there's George Knapp on the most recent Joe Rogan interview saying about how George was quite worried about COVID at first, and he'd heard about these like UV things you can get that kills all the bugs. So and they didn't know at first whether you could get this thing from packages and stuff. So George was a bit worried. He happened to mention it to Bob, and Bob just went, "I don't worry about that. I've got the stuff in the garage. I'll build you one." And a couple of days later, this handmade UV generator just appeared, and George started using it. So this is a guy that he's quite a talented engineer and a very talented scientist, but he has no education.
Well, I'm sorry, that just doesn't line up. Just not generally. It could do. You know, Albert Einstein was a patent clerk.
It could be self-taught, you mean? Well, I mean, this is before the internet and stuff. He'd have to read a lot, but I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, it's much harder for him to have done this in the 80s, probably, than it is if he was a bit younger. Yes, very much so. So I think his story about his education at prestigious places is more likely back then than it would be now. You could probably teach yourself a lot of stuff online today and wouldn't necessarily need to.
If you were bright enough, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are issues with his education as well that go beyond the fact that we've got no physical evidence. When he was interviewed and asked about could you name tutors and things, he struggled. He actually got some of the names wrong, which is a concern back in the 80s when he was interviewed.
Now, I'm not going to say that Bob Lazar is some sort of genius, but it is true that sometimes very clever people aren't always the nicest people. They tend to be quite egocentric, quite self-absorbed. They don't really worry about the normal social conventions. They can be quite unpleasant people. They can be so focused on what they're doing that they don't really notice or worry about the things around them, like people's names. Sometimes they can just be a bit odd.
There's also timeline issues that when people have looked into it and investigated it, and if he went to MIT and Caltech when he says he did, at least at one point he had to be in two places at the same time. So these are problems with the story. A lot of people aim, though, and when I've talked about this on Facebook groups and things, a lot of people say, just look up his seedy past, and you'll see that he's a dodgy character. And I think one of the things they're talking about, and George Knapp mentions his legal problems, but never goes into any details about it. The legal problems were that he was arrested for helping some prostitutes set up a brothel. And this was after he was famous. So this was after all the interviews and things. Right? And he did get arrested for it. And in Vegas, nobody actually gets charged for these things, even though what he did was illegal. But Bob did, and he ended up in court. He then, when he was asked about his background, he says, I have a degree at Caltech, I have a degree at MIT, I did this, I did that thing. They obviously then couldn't verify it. The courts couldn't verify it. The judge was going to let him off with a slap on the wrists, but kept saying, we can't verify your story, your education. So he was looking at prison time because of it. And he had weeks. I think he was being threatened with actually going to prison, and he did not change his story. He could say, I have a degree at MIT and Caltech. So if he's lying, he's really committed to the lie. I mean, he was looking at getting gang raped in prison, and he potentially, I don't know how much that actually happens in America, but it's possible. He was looking at genuine prison time. Most people, if they were lying, would then go, yeah, okay, you got me. Can I go now?
Yep.
The gimbal video, everybody looked at that video that believed Bob and went, that's what Bob's talking about. That's it.
Yeah. There's just too many coincidences for me with Bob. There's just too many things that he's got right and too many things that wouldn't align if he wasn't telling the truth.
Well, this is